Yeah, so it has started recording. So formally welcome back. And as I was just summarizing to you, we are going to start chapter 7 of Rudin. What is the title of the chapter? Did anyone look at it? Just the title.
Differentiation, sir.
Differentiation. Okay, so we are going to differentiate measures. You've already seen differentiating measure once, no? In chapter 6, there was a word called differentiation. Not differentiation, we used another word. What was another word for differentiation? What you differentiate and get, what is it called in English?
Derivative.
Derivative. And you have seen this word in chapter 6, no?
Yes.
What was it called?
Radon. Radon-Nikodym derivative.
Radon-Nikodym derivative, right? So you can you have a notion of taking derivative of a measure, and that's what we are going to start with. Okay, so let me start sharing the screen. And as usual, one of you please confirm.
Yes, it's okay.
Yes, sir.
So the theme is derivatives of measures for today, and let's start. Okay. So mu is a complex measure on RK. So what is the biggest difference that you see from last all the lectures and now?
We are using complex measure at least.
No, which we use for Radon-Nikodym also.
So
It's an RK, I think.
Yeah,
It
we
is
are
an RK.
restricting, for this chapter, we are restricting our access. Up to now, access either an arbitrary space or whenever we had least representation theorem kind of concepts, Lucene, etc., it was a locally compact Hausdorff space. And sometimes we also assumed it's sigma compact. But now we are taking X to be RK. Is it sigma compact? Is RK sigma compact?
yes,
Is it sigma finite?
yes.
Yeah. So, well, with respect to some measure, right? Only then you can talk about sigma compact and sigma finite, no? In Lebesgue measure, certainly it's sigma compact
Yeah,
and sigma.
Lebesgue measure.
Yeah, so mu is an arbitrary complex measure on RK. And what is the title? I am going to introduce a notion of derivative of a measure. Okay. And I'm calling it symmetric derivative because Rudin is calling it symmetric derivative in order to differentiate it from the Radon-Nikodym derivative. Okay. But we will see at the end of the slide, we will see that both will match. So mu is a complex measure and m is a Lebesgue measure. Okay. So we are going to take this quotient. What is b of x comma r? What is b of x comma r?
Ball.
Yeah,
Ball
Ball
so
of
center
radius
X
r.
x is
radius.
a point in RK, r is a positive number, and this is an open ball with center x and radius r. And you take the mu measure of it and divide by the Lebesgue measure of it. And this is a certain quotient. It depends on r. So we call this qr mu of x. And take limit as r goes to 0. Okay, this limit may exist, may not exist. If it exists, then we say that the symmetric derivative of mu at x is that limit, and we denote it by d mu of x. Is the definition clear? So Rudin is nicely motivating this definition by doing k equal to 1. You know how it matches with your usual notion of derivative. This is essentially the same. Since I wanted to speed up, I am skipping such motivations. Is the definition clear? You have mu and m is anyway there. You take a ball, radius r, take take the measure in mu of that ball and divide by the Lebesgue measure. Take limit as r goes to 0. The limit may or may not exist. If the limit exists at a point x, then you say this is d mu at x. It is a symmetric derivative of mu at x. Since Lebesgue measure is fixed, that's not part of our notation. Is that okay? Is the definition okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
Say something so that I can continue.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now suppose mu is absolutely continuous with respect to m. That was not given in this definition, right? So we have the notion of symmetric derivative without any notion of absolute continuity. But suppose you have this also, then you have a notion of derivative of mu with respect to m, right? Which is what we just recalled. What was it called? If mu is absolutely continuous with respect to m, then you have derivative of mu with respect to m. No, what is that derivative?
Radon-Nikodym.
Radon-Nikodym derivative, right? That will be a function, right? That will be an L1 function. L1 in which measure? L1 function in which measure?
L1m.
L1m, right? So that will be a function, L1 function. Is d mu a function? The way you have defined d mu, is it a function?
Yes, complex value.
Yeah, it's a function, right? It's a function because at x it will take some number. No, these are numbers. This is yeah, you're right. This is a complex number, and limit will be a complex number if it exists. So this is a complex valued function. The Radon-Nikodym derivative is also a complex valued function. So this is Radon-Nikodym derivative. What should be the relationship between the two? So it's an open-ended question, but assume everything is nice. The world is nice. It's not cheating. What should be the relationship? Take a guess. What will be the best relationship possible?
Then almost everywhere equal.
They are equal. They are equal is the best relationship, but in measure theory, you know, I mean, almost everywhere only you can conclude. So they are equal almost everywhere. Is this is Manoj? Who guessed it? Is it Manoj?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? Do you agree with Manoj? That should be the best relationship. Fast.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So that is true. Okay. So this is theorem 7.8. We are starting chapter 7, and this is theorem 7.8. And this is a corollary to our last slide today. So we are going to do this theorem 7.8, but verbally. I don't have it on my slides, but I'll give you a 1-line, 2-line proof because we are going to build up some theory. Okay. So this is beautiful, right? You have this notion of derivative, which has no absolute continuity or anything. Just using, you know, just take measures, divide, take the quotient, take the limit, usual notion of derivative. You have the Radon-Nikodym derivative whenever you have absolute continuity, and that they are equal. That kind of tells you that that you defined it as Radon-Nikodym derivative. That's a meaningful expression, right? That's a good terminology, right? So this agreeing is a beautiful result, and we are going to do it. Okay. Maybe I'll have to take 5 minutes extra or something. We will see. I'll try not to take too much time. But we will do this. Okay, so remind me that we have to do this because it's not there in the slides. So what is the theorem? What is theorem 7.8? If mu is a complex measure which is absolutely continuous with respect to m, then d mu and Radon-Nikodym derivative agree almost everywhere. In particular, mu of E is integral. So this is the last slide. This is a corollary to the last slide. So what is the title here? Just read out the title.
Maximal function.
So this is what I was trying to say, that see, I will not be able to say much about it. I know nothing beyond whatever is there in Rudin, but it's a very important concept which you know, there are very different maximal functions. We are going to do one of them, the very first one, which came in the literature, but there are, you know, in advanced research, there are other maximal functions, and these play an important role in partial differential equations and other areas. Okay, so they first appeared in this particular very famous paper by Hardy and Littlewood. Do you know both these mathematicians, Hardy and Littlewood, or only one of them?
Yes, both.
Both. Hardy certainly you know. Hardy is famous in India
No,
because
sir. I think every time both comes together.
Yeah, both were doing.
both are familiar. Littlewood, anyway, in measure theory itself, we mentioned Littlewood, no? Not in my slides, but verbally we mentioned. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Littlewood's 3 principles, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a 1930 paper. By the way, Acta Mathematica is one of the most important journals in mathematics for analysis. Okay. So they first appeared here, and let me, you know, because I know that it's important, and because I don't know much about it, I'm just quoting from Wikipedia on this page. So maximal function is a significant nonlinear operator used in real analysis and harmonic analysis. You know, I mean, these are the things which you need in partial differential equations. It takes a locally integrable function f and returns another function called mf that at each point x gives the maximum average value that f can have on balls centered at that point. So you can read that once more once we see the formal definition. Okay, so I'm going to define the maximal function, and it is using the maximal function that we are going to study the derivative. Okay, so for a positive measure mu, earlier mu was complex measure, but now mu is valued where? Mu is valued in
Non-negative.
0 to infinity, 0 included, infinity included. Okay, positive measure mu. This is the definition. So what is QR mu? Just recall QR mu very quickly.
Quotient.
Quotient. Mu in the numerator and m in the denominator. So what is the difference between d mu and m mu? What's the difference between d mu and m mu? There also you took the quotient. Here also I am taking the quotient. What is the difference?
There we are limit, and here we are taking.
Yeah. Here we are taking the supremum. Therefore, it certainly exists, right? Because infinity is included.
Yes.
And mu is positive. Okay. So this certainly exists. And if mu is a complex measure, by definition, mu is m of total variation of mu. So that it makes sense for complex measures. Clear the definition? So take the supremum of those quotients overall R, and for a positive measure, for a complex measure, take the total variation measure, and then it is a positive measure, and then take its maximal function. Okay. Why is it called maximal function? You will see. We are going to prove a theorem, and that is where perhaps the name is coming from. So check the following important computation. Try to do it yourself from the definition. If you can't, look at Rudin. Okay. This is a lower semi-continuous function. Mu is automatically lower semi-continuous, and therefore it's measurable. Okay. So it's a measurable function. In fact, it's lower semi-continuous. Okay. So keep this in mind. We are going to use this, and if you can't do it yourself, it's just 3-4 lines. But yeah, I mean, you have to do it in a particular way. Try doing yourself. If you can't, look at Rudin. Okay. The slide is okay. Shall we move on? So we have defined the notion of symmetric derivative. We stated the theorem that it matches with the Radon-Nikodym derivative if mu is absolutely continuous with respect to m. And in this slide, I have defined the maximal function of any complex measure. And then we asserted that it is lower semi-continuous. Okay. Moving on, there is a theorem called the maximal theorem, an important result, and it is what is called, so in partial differential equations, you will have estimates. Okay, you will have weak type estimates and strong type estimates and all these kind of things. So we will see. I will motivate the word weak in the next slide maybe. So it is what is called a weak type estimate. Rudin calls it the maximal theorem. Wiki calls it weak type estimate, Wikipedia. And this is theorem 7.4. Okay, so let me state that and let me prove it. So mu is a complex Borel measure on RK. I'm assuming mu is Borel, and lambda is a positive real number. Okay, strictly positive real number. Then the theorem is this. So what is the left hand side and what is the right hand side? This is the Lebesgue measure, right? What is the meaning of this set? Mu is bigger than lambda. What could be the meaning of this set? What do you mean by f bigger than g?
Fx greater than gx for all x.
Yeah.
Fx
Set of all
greater than-
x where set of all x. No. I'm not saying for all. This is a set, curly bracket, right? And I'm looking at the measure of that set. So this is the notation for set of all x in RK where mu of x is bigger than lambda.
Inverse image of that set.
Say it again. Say that again. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, he is saying inverse image of means open interval lambda and infinity.
Correct. Inverse image of lambda to infinity. Correct. set of all points where mu of x is bigger than lambda. That set you take the measure, and that measure is bounded
Sir?
by, yeah. Is there a question? Okay, that measure is bounded by what all are coming on the right hand side. An important result, pay attention. This is the norm of mu, and the lambda that you have fixed, which is coming, right? Mu is coming here, mu is coming here. Lambda is coming here, 1 by lambda is coming here. And what is Ck? What is K? There is no K here, no, on the left hand side. So what is K?
K is the
Is there a
dimension.
K on the left hand side? Is there a K on the left hand side?
Yes.
Yes, because this is a
That
Lebesgue measure
belongs
on
to
RK.
RK.
This is a Lebesgue measure on RK. It is that case. So what should be Ck? Typically in number
Constant.
theory or partial differential, yeah, it's a constant. But why do I put bracket K? Why not just C?
It depends on K.
It depends on K, but more importantly, it depends only on K. The constant does not depend on mu or lambda. Right? The constant could have been C of K, comma, mu, comma, lambda, no? Right? So I'm saying that the way this constant is coming here, lambda and mu can be taken apart, and only this much is coming, and this remaining constant depends only on K. Okay, so it's an important result. So yeah, it's an important result, and in fact, in Rudin's proof, you will see that Ck is 3 power k. Okay, so when you do estimates, you know, actual numbers might come like this. So Ck is 3 power k. We are going to prove with Ck equal to 3 power k. Okay, and let me quote from Rudin that the maximal function of a measure cannot be large on a large set. That's what this result is roughly saying. So does that make sense? The maximal function of a measure, this is the maximal function of a measure. It cannot be large because it is bounded by something, right? So it's not very, very large, right? Cannot be large is less than or equal to, no? On a large set, mu bigger than lambda is a large set, right? Because lambda is a fixed constant. So beyond that is a large part. So on a large set, maximal function of a measure on a large set cannot be very large. That is what the theorem is roughly saying. Okay, you have a good bound. 3 power k by lambda times norm mu is a bound for the Lebesgue measure of this set. Okay, so let's prove this.
Sir,
and
sir,
yeah, is there a question?
When we define m in mu, right?
Yeah.
Then we take mu a positive measure.
No, I defined it for complex measure. No, take its total variation and take mu. Mu means m of mod mu. Mod mu is the total variation measure.
Okay.
Okay, mu means m of mod mu. There is no other meaning. Clear, no? So that greater than is fine. Okay. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. So here is a lemma, and I'm going to use this lemma. And this lemma I'll skip the proof because it has nothing to do with measure theory. Okay, there is a measure theoretic statement also, but it's more elementary. Okay, so read carefully. W is the union of a finite collection of balls, B of xi, ri, capital N number of them. Okay. So it's a finite collection of balls. Then there exists a subset of this 1, n such that the following three properties are true. First one, in this subcollection, if you take the balls indexed by the subcollection, they are disjoint. Right? This finite collection need not be disjoint, but you can take a disjoint subcollection in such a way that W is covered by that disjoint union. Okay. So from the finite collection, you can take a subcollection which is disjoint, mutually disjoint, and that union is enough to cover your original set W, and with this property. So you can see, you know, this 3 power k in the theorem is coming from here. M of W, the measure of W is less than or equal to 3 power k times summation I in this subcollection measure of BXI RI. Okay, so this is what is called a covering lemma. and we are going to assume this. Okay, it has a simple enough proof. So this is used in the proof of the maximal theorem. What is maximal theorem once again? Just recall maximal theorem. It was there in the previous slide, but before measure of
greater than lambda is less than or equal to ck by lambda times
ck is now 3 power k. Ck is 3 power k. 3 power k by lambda times norm mu. Okay, that's what we have to prove. But once you have this covering lemma, this 3 power k is coming from there, and it's not very difficult. So let me ask a fun question. This has nothing to do with what I am asking. It's just for fun. Just for fun. Do you recall lemma 6.3? This is lemma 7.3. That was also a lemma which I stated. And I said, you know, it's elementary, you look at it. And then we proved something. And a constant coming in the lemma came in the theorem. Exactly like here. A constant 3 power k coming in the lemma is coming in our theorem as 3 power k. There also there was a constant in the lemma which came. No, it did not come in the theorem, but it no, it did not come in the theorem, but there was a nice constant coming there also. And therefore, you know, in the theorem, we took a function involving that constant. Does anyone recall 6.3? So this is, you know, at the beginning of chapter 6. And it was elementary and it had nothing to do with measure theory, so I skipped it. Do you recall?
Sir, 1 by pi times some summation.
Yeah. 5 times that, and Akshay should remember, he told me that this was asked in the TIFR exam or something, right? And is there any similarity other than a particular constant coming there? Pi came here, 3 power k is coming. These are two very different things, sir. This is just for fun, okay? Just to, you know, just to use our memory. Is there any other similarity between this lemma and that lemma? Both are elementary. Other than that?
Yes, sub collection.
Yeah, sub collection. You know, you had 1 to n and you were looking at a sub collection and saying something about it. There you got a particular reverse inequality. Maybe for fun, I said reverse triangle inequality or something. But on one side, it was a sub collection. Here also, it's on one side, it's a sub collection. Okay. So, but this has nothing to do with that lemma. I mean, this is just for fun. Yeah.
From point 2, we can get measure of W is less equals to measure of union, and that is less equals to summation of measure of each ball. Then why the 3 power k?
Yeah, W is covered by these things. So measure of W is less than or equal to measure of the union. And because it's a disjoint union, measure of the union, okay, even otherwise, even if it's not disjoint, measure of the union is less than or equal to summation of measures, right?
Yes.
Good question. So am I making a mistake in the statement? Yeah, why do we say this, right? Because summation of measure is certainly less than or equal to 3 power k times summation of measure, right? Because 3 power k is a positive number. So I'm confused. So let me look at Rudin. Okay, so I will.
In the book, it is written that W is contained in union BXI 3 times RI.
So that's what there's a mistake. And let me also look at Rudin in front of you. So whatever I share in desktop, you will be able to see, right? Yeah, good that you point out. It's important. See, this is what happens when we don't do the proof. Because we don't know what typo I'm making. What do you see now?
Books.
Collection of books.
I should not have shown it because maybe one is not supposed to keep all these PDFs. Yeah, I don't know. So roughly what page it will come? Chapter 7. Yeah, anyway, I refer to some pages, no?
137.
137, but there's some introduction also. Let me put 150. Yeah, so I can go back. You can see, right?
Yeah.
So this is chapter 7. And yeah, good that, yeah, thanks for pointing out. This is a very important, very important thing to remember. Otherwise, there's that natural question. So W is contained in Bxi 3 power I Ri, and then this is automatic, no? If you have this, this is automatic, right? Because measure of W is less than or equal to summation of measure of this, but measure of a ball of radius 3 times r will be 3 power k times measure of the other ball, no? Because it's Lebesgue measure, right? Let's see the proof. Yeah, it is exactly that. So that's automatic. So point number 3 is automatic from point number 2. Anyway, it's a simple enough proof. Okay, so thanks for correcting. I will make the change. Shall we continue? So here it is 3 Ri, and therefore you get this automatically from this. So this is the crucial point. From this is automatic. Okay. Shall we continue? So this is going to be used. In fact, this is the only thing that we need to use in order to prove the maximal theorem. So maximal theorem, this is the set that we are interested in, right? And what was the theorem once again? Lebesgue measure of this is bounded by 3 power k by lambda times norm of mu. And this, as we said, is this set, right? X in our case is that mu of x is bigger than lambda. Agree?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep. And this is same as one of you said, mu inverse of lambda to infinity, right? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Now, in the very first slide, what was the exercise that I gave? I said check something. What was the statement?
Mu is lower semi-continuous.
So what is it that you had to check in order to say that mu is lower semi-continuous?
The given set is open. No.
This set is open. For any lambda, this set is open, right? Yeah. So the exercise that you had to do is to check that this set is open. Okay, so assume that because this you have already done. So this set is open, and you pick a compact subset of this open set. So let K be an arbitrary compact subset of this set. Okay. Now if K is contained in this set, then what can you say? So if K is contained in this set, for each x in K, what can you say about QR mod mu of x? This is mod mu of BXR by M of BXR. If x belongs to K, then mu of x. What is mu of x? Mu of x is supremum over this, no? Right? Mu of x is supremum over these things, right? Agree? So if x belongs to K, then K is contained in this set. So supremum of these things is bigger than lambda. So what can you conclude? There exists an R such that this is bigger than lambda. You agree? Because if for all R, if this was less than or equal to lambda, then supremum will be less than or equal to lambda, no? Whereas here X is such that supremum is bigger than lambda. All of you are okay with this statement?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because supremum K is a subset of this. Okay, so for each X, there is some R such that this happens. Okay, so keep that in mind that by compactness, for each X, there is an R. So you have got a ball, no? B of XR. By compactness, K can be covered. Anyway, K can be covered by union of all such balls, no? Because each X and K you are taking. So whatever the radius is, all those balls put together will be a cover for K, right? So how are you going to use compactness? By compactness, what will be my next line?
Finite circle.
There is a finite subcover, right? From this cover, you extract a subcover. A finite collection of such balls will cover K. Agree?
Yes, sir.
Are you with me or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now tell me what to do. Now what? You should be able to say that, and then that's the end of the proof. So you are in a situation where you have a finite union of balls. If you have a finite union of balls, then what was the lemma earlier? Covering lemma. W is a finite union of balls, then
Measure of W less than or equal to some 3 power K.
yeah, but what is the crucial point that you have not said? In that finite collection, you can extract a sub collection.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. Which is disjoint. That's important. Okay. Disjoint in such a way that measure of W is less than or equal to 3 power K times summation of those measures over those sub indices. I mean, indices from the sub collection. Apply that.
Sir,
So get it
sir,
disjoint. Yeah.
in that lemma, that sub collection may not be disjoint, but after applying 3 times radius, that should be disjoint.
That was another typo, is it?
No, sir. Means
Here is it Ri or 3Ri?
sir,
In
these VIXI, BXIRI may not be disjoint.
No, here it is Ri.
Here it is Ri. So I am claiming that these are disjoint. This is I belongs to S.
Okay.
See, a subcollection which is disjoint. These balls need not be disjoint. All the n, see, if n is 10, there are 10 balls. Now 2 balls may intersect, but I am taking a subcollection. So if 1 and 2 intersect, I am not taking 2 maybe, or maybe I am not taking 1. Somehow, you know, there is a subcollection, and in that subcollection, everything is mutually disjoint. Clear, no?
Okay.
Okay, so here you have got some collection. By compactness, you have got a finite collection, but that need not be disjoint. But now you apply that lemma and get a disjoint subcollection of this finite collection. Okay, and call that B1 etc. Bn. This is the disjoint subcollection of this finite collection. Here I did not put a number, such that now let's see what is happening. M of k. So k is contained in this subcollection union, right? So m of k is less than or equal to 3 power k times summation mbi. Agree? By the lemma.
Yes, sir.
The lemma you are applying to this finite union. But k is contained in that. So measure of k is contained in measure of this union. This is w. So measure of k is less than or equal to measure of w. Measure of w is less than or equal to this is the lemma. So by the lemma you get this. All of you are with me?
Yes, sir.
Now use the fact that bi is a disjoint. Use the fact that bi is a disjoint, and therefore, okay, even before that, measure of bi, all these balls have the property that measure of bi is less than mod mu of bi by lambda, because that's how you chose your balls from this inequality. So measure of bi is less than mod mu of bi divided by lambda. Agree? So m is changed to mod mu by lambda. Now use the fact that bi is a disjoint. So what can you say about summation mod mu of bi? It is same as mod mu of summation bi. No, mod mu of union bi. Agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, because it is disjoint, and that is less than or equal to norm mu, because norm mu was the supremum. What was the definition of norm mu? Over partitions, you are taking the supremum, right? Norm mu is mod mu
Norm
of the
mu.
whole RK.
Yeah, whole.
Norm mu is mod mu of the whole RK. Okay, and mod mu of whole RK is bigger than mod mu of union bi, and mod mu of union bi is supremum over all partitions of summation mod bi of mu or whatever. No, in fact, you don't need that. You don't need supremum. I'm only saying this is mod mu of union bi, but union bi is contained in RK. So mod mu of union bi is less than or equal to mod mu of RK, but mod mu of RK is what we call norm mu. Agree? So the crucial point here we used is this you can take as mod mu of union bi because bi is a disjoint. Are you okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now how will you finish the proof? You have got the right hand side as you wanted. Left hand side measure of this you need. What you have done is if you take an arbitrary compact subset, then that measure is less than or equal to what you wanted. So how will you finish the proof? Just give me one line and that's the end of the proof.
Inner regularity.
You don't need, no, you don't know whether mu is irregular. No, MS irregular. Yes. We are taking the Lebesgue measure. Yeah, irregular. So basically what you're saying is take the supremum over these case, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right, irregularity. So take subset, take a compact subset, you have got this inequality, take supremum over all those compact subsets. Okay, so you will get the inequality with measure of this also. Is the proof absolutely clear? It's a very important theorem. So the basic ingredient was the covering lemma, which is elementary. Okay, so it is, coming with the correct definition was what was important. Theorem was easy because you got the correct definition of maximal function. Okay, now let me continue and let me introduce a notion of what is the title here? Weak L1. So all of you know L1 functions. Now I'm going to define a class of functions called weak L1 functions. From the very English, you tell me which one contains which one. You have the class of L1 functions and you have the class of weak L1 functions. Which is the bigger class? The way we have
Weak
is a
L1.
bigger class, right? Because L1 must be strong L1 and strong should imply weak. Okay. So weak L1 is a class containing all the L1 functions, but strictly bigger. In order to motivate the definition, let us start with an L1 function. Suppose f is an L1 function and lambda is a positive number, and you consider this set, mod f bigger than lambda. What is the meaning of this set? Set of all x such that mod fx is bigger than lambda. Okay. And consider lambda times measure of this set, E. This is less than or equal to integral over E mod f dm, no? Because E is mod f is bigger than lambda. So this is lambda integral dm over E, but which is integral lambda dm, but lambda is less than mod f over E, so this is true, right? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And this is less than integral over the whole thing, no? Because E is a subset of Rk.
Yes.
But this is what you call the one norm, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we are going to define a class called weak L1 if it's a measurable function. First of all, it's a measurable function and lambda times the measure of this set, mod f bigger than lambda, mod f bigger than lambda. This is a bounded function of lambda. This is a function of lambda, no? As lambda varies, this is a function of lambda, right? Because you have lambda here and here, so it's a function of lambda. It should be bounded. So that's what's happening here, no? This is bounded by, in fact, the one norm. So it is bounded. As a function of lambda, this should be bounded. This product should be bounded. Then you say that it is weak L1. Therefore, clearly L1 functions are weak L1, right? Because we proved it here. Agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, so L1 is strictly contained in weak L1. So you try to give an example. In fact, the simplest example that you can think of from Riemann integration will give you an example. Okay, something which is not L1, but that's in weak L1. Okay, what is the simplest non-L1 function that you know, even in Riemann integration? On real line, R1. Anyway, think about it. Okay.
Constant function.
Huh? No, okay, maybe that will not give an example. You have to see, but yeah, anyway, you think about it. I'm not going to do it. So check for strict inequality, which means you have to give an example of a weak L1 function, which is not L1. Okay, so do that. It's there in Rodin, by the way. Simple example is there. So if f is an L1 Rk, I want to define the maximal function of f. Up to now, I have defined maximal function of what?
Major.
A complex measure. Now, if f is in L1RK, what should be the definition of MF? I know how to define the maximal function of a complex measure. So associated to f, there is a very natural measure, no, because we are on RK. What is that measure?
Supremum of those lambda.
No, given a function f, there is a natural measure, no? What is the most natural measure on RK?
DM.
This integral FDM.
Yeah, just FDM. In our notation, d mu is FDM. Because dm is Lebesgue measure. Just integrate with respect to Lebesgue measure this function, that will be a measure. So we are going to define MF as mu, where mu is FDM. So this is how you define the maximal function of a L1 function. In fact, this is what Hardy and Littlewood defined. They did not define it for a measure. They defined it for a function, and they defined it directly. And our definition is exactly that. Clear? MF? Okay. So do you recall this? If mu is FDM, then mod mu is nothing but mod FDM. We did this, no? This was a corollary to. This was a corollary to. This was last class. In fact, this is where I got stuck. And then I said we will come back to it, but then there was no time, so we did not come back to it. It was a corollary to.
Sir, when we show that any complex measure is.
Yeah, it had a name, no? Z equal to R e power I theta.
Polar
decomposition. And polar decomposition is a corollary to
Radon-Nikodym.
Radon-Nikodym theorem. Okay, so we have all these things, and now see the most interesting thing. Okay, you have a maximal operator. What is the maximal operator? M. And what is the code? What is the domain of this operator? We are taking an L1 function. So what is the domain? You are taking f in L1 and you are applying M. So what is the domain of the operator? It is this Banach space, L1 RK. And we are going to say, so MF will be some function, right? We don't know what kind of a function it is, but we have got a nice space. We are going to say what is the codomain of this operator in general. Do you want to take a guess from whatever we introduced? What is a codomain? M is an operator, so it's from one space to another space. And my domain is L1. I mean, if I restrict M to L1, then take a guess and you will be right. From whatever.
Complex.
Yeah. Huh? MF will be another function, but what kind of functions? What class of functions?
Weak L1.
Weak L1. MF need not be L1, but MF is always weak L1. Okay, we know that the maximal operator is weak L1, and why do we know that? By the maximal theorem. Because what is the definition of weak L1? Weak L1 meaning if MF is weak L1, we have to show that lambda times measure of MF bigger than lambda. That should be bounded. But what is maximal theorem telling you? Maximal theorem says that measure of mu bigger than lambda. Mu is same as MF. Mu bigger than lambda is bounded by 3 power k by lambda. So that lambda has come here. So this product is less than or equal to 3 power k times 3 power k times norm of mu, but norm of mu is same as norm of f, 1 norm of f. Agree? For this particular FDM, norm of mu will be 1 norm of f, and MF will be MF. Yeah, mu will be m mod mu, which is m mod f. Okay, so by the maximal theorem, so this is why maximal theorem was important. Maximal theorem tells you that MF is weak L1. Clear? And that is why Wikipedia called it a weak type estimate. Weak type estimate. Okay, this is why it's called a weak type estimate, because it is telling you that it takes L1 to weak L1. All these are very important notions. You know, you can ask if F is in LP, then where will MF be? You know, there are important results about this. This is modern analysis. You know, big results in these kind of things came in 1940s, 1950s. That's kind of modern by whatever we are looking at. In fact, maximal function itself was introduced only in 1930, whereas all our earlier results were 1850s, 1870s, right? Yeah. So this is modern research in that sense, and much more modern things are happening in all these areas. You know, there's what is called singular integrals and all that. I don't know much about it. Okay, so this is the important point. By the maximal theorem, the codomain is weak L1. Now let me introduce another important notion. What is our final aim in today's lecture? Can somebody recall? Where do we want to stop today? Yeah.
Theorem 7.8.
What should be our stopping point today? You know this. We discussed this in at the starting of the class. Where will I stop today? I gave a theorem number in Rudin, no?
7.8.
7.8. And what is that theorem? We discussed this 45 minutes ago or 1 hour ago. This was the very first slide. What did I do in the very first slide? I introduced
Mu
what
is
is called
absolutely continuous with respect to m, then d mu and Reto-Nikodym derivative are almost everywhere equal.
Correct. So that's what we want to do, and I'm going to introduce this notion of what is called a Lebesgue point. Okay, so very, very important definition. A Lebesgue point of an L1 function I'm going to define. Okay, so it's a point. So a point means what? It is some vector in a point where? What is our space?
L1 of Rk.
No, L1 of Rk is a function, but our vector space is basic space is Rk. So a point of Rk it is. So I'm going to define a Lebesgue point of an L1 function. There is a point x in Rk such that the following should be true. Okay, so what am I doing here? I'm integrating over a ball center x radius r. What am I integrating? I'm integrating with respect to the Lebesgue measure, but the variable is y. But I am subtracting fx. So fy minus fx dy. And I take the average, divide 1 by m of that, and take limit as r goes to 0. This should be 0. So this quantity is something depending on x, no? Right? Y goes out, right? I'm taking average over y. But the x is remaining. If this quantity is, if limit is 0, then that point x is called a Lebesgue point of f. Maybe it's not well motivated. I will quote from Rudin to give some motivation. But is the statement looking okay? 1 by m of bxr. So x is a Lebesgue point of f if the following is true. This limit is 0. So you're integrating with respect to y, but there's an x in the integrand. Okay. So what it says is, so I'm just quoting from Rudin, that Lebesgue points or f are points where f does not oscillate too much. You know, f doesn't change so much. So this is a point x where if you take another y from bxr, right? You have a point x, you take a ball of radius r and take another y, and if you integrate over that y, you take an average. So average of that is not changing too much because in the limit it is 0. Okay, so that's some way of looking at it. In an average sense, these are points where f is not, you know, hugely oscillating. You have some control over f around that point. Those points are the Lebesgue points. Can you give, you know, if you have a function f, can you give some obvious Lebesgue points of a function? If f is integrable, what is better than integrable? What is better than integrable? Think of Riemann integration on real line. What is better than being Riemann integrable?
Simple function.
Yeah, but true, that is in one sense. In another sense, suppose these are not simple. It's not actual proper graphs, but you want it to be integrable on a bounded domain, let us say.
Continuous.
Continuous, right? So continuous functions are good functions which, okay, certain continuous functions need not be in the whole L1. But suppose a point, suppose you take a function in L1 and suppose it is continuous at a point x. It may be continuous at some point and may not be continuous at some other point. If it is continuous, is that a Lebesgue point? By this definition, suppose f is continuous at x.
Yes, sir.
Is this limit 0?
Yes, sir.
Because fy minus fx will be arbitrarily small,
It's
right?
small. Sorry,
Yes, sir.
So
yes.
continuous, so points of, so that's what you are trying to abstractize. Okay, your L1 function may not be continuous at any point, right? Can you give a function which is in L1 but discontinuous everywhere? Anyway, think about it. It need not be continuous, and therefore, yeah.
Dirichlet
Somebody
function.
told me.
Dirichlet function, I think.
Say it again.
Dirichlet function, sir. Not continuous, but
I don't know about it. I mean, I couldn't even
Sir,
hear you.
Sir, that is rationals 1 and irrationals it is 0.
Yeah, something like that will be automatically Lebesgue integrable, with integral being 0, but that's, yeah. So you can look up. Okay. So points of continuity are clearly Lebesgue points, but that doesn't give you a general idea because a function can be very arbitrary and they may not be continuous points. Okay. So example is a point of continuity. Natural question. Does every L1 function have a Lebesgue point? It's going to be an important notion and it's not at all obvious. If there is a point of continuity, then yes, but they may not be continuous points and therefore it's not obvious. But that is theorem 7.7. Our last theorem is 7.8. So we are nearing. 7.7 gives much more. In fact, Rodin calls it remarkable. Okay. So what should be the answer? The way I have phrased this question, what should be theorem 7.7? Every L1 function has. Every L1 function has.
Lebesgue point.
At least one Lebesgue point. It should be that theorem because I have asked a question and I said it's not obvious and I said there is this remarkable theorem, right? But I also said gives much more. Can you take a guess? What is much more than at least one Lebesgue point?
The way how we can find those points.
That is one way. Yeah, but yeah, in some sense, there are plenty. Okay, plenty of Lebesgue points. So it says, the theorem says, almost every x is a Lebesgue point of an L1 function. Given an L1 function, the non-Lebesgue points is measure 0. So almost every point is a Lebesgue point. So it's an important theorem. And good, no? It was not at all obvious from the definition, but we are going to prove that every x, not every x, almost every x is a Lebesgue point. Given any L1 function, set of non-Lebesgue points is of Lebesgue measure 0. Okay. So let's prove that. So we are going to define TRF to be this quantity. This is exactly what came in the definition of Lebesgue point, no? Lebesgue point was the limit as r goes to 0, right? X is a Lebesgue point if limit as r goes to 0, this is 0. So this is the quantity that came. It depends on r because I'm not taking limit here. So this is called TRF. So define TRF to be this and put TF to be the lim sup of this as r goes to 0. Okay, and we are going to claim that TF is 0 almost everywhere. That's what we have to do, right? If the lim sup of this quantity is 0 almost everywhere, then the limit is 0, no? Because these are all positive quantities. These are all non-negative quantities. So lim sup 0 meaning limit 0, right? Okay. So this is what we are going to claim. This is what we need to show. TF is 0 and we are going to do it very nicely. Okay. First of all, can you guess how the proof should be? As soon as we define Lebesgue point, what was an obvious Lebesgue point? from the very definition? A point where the function is
Continuous.
continuous. Therefore, in order to prove such a theorem, it will be kind of natural in order to use continuous functions, no? Because if a function is continuous, if f is continuous, then tf is 0, right? Agree? If f is continuous, then tf is 0. That was our observation.
Yes, yes.
But we want to prove that tf is 0 almost everywhere for any L1 function. Because tf is 0 for a continuous function, wouldn't it be natural to use continuous functions in this proof? Yes or no? But how do you get a continuous function given an L1 function? What is the result that you know? You know that CCX is dense in LP, right?
Yes.
What is the name associated with that result? CCX is dense in LP. What was the important contribution? What is the name?
Lucian theorem.
Lucin. Yeah, not exactly what we stated as Lucin, but it's a corollary of Lucin. So we are going to use that fact in order to show this result. So proof is easy. All these things, this is the beauty of mathematics, good mathematics. Once you have the correct definitions, proving something will not be very difficult. Whereas not so good mathematics, proofs will be very complicated. That is because you have not touched upon the correct definitions. As some famous people say, the most important thing, I am not saying, okay, I don't have a philosophy. I just do what I am asked to do. But some people have a philosophy of mathematics, and some very important mathematicians opine that the most important thing in mathematics is not a theorem but a definition. Have you heard this? Have you heard this philosophy?
No, sir.
For example, the notion of a continuous function. You have this rigorous definition of epsilon and delta, right? Why do you need such a definition? Can't you say that I draw a graph and if I don't take the pencil from the paper, then it's continuous? Maybe that would be the most natural thing of continuity, no? But then, so that was the kind of the notion, but it took decades. And finally, Weierstrass, I think it was Weierstrass who came up with the definition which we use today. So what is the point of getting the correct definition? With the correct definition, you will have beautiful theorems, and theorems can be proved in a very natural and nice way. So only if you have good definitions, you will have good theorems which afford simple proofs. If you don't have not so good definitions, theorems will look complicated, proofs will look even more complicated. Theorems will not look simple. Theorems may not look appealing with your, not so good definitions, and the proofs will be complicated. So that's how, you end up in the correct definition by, various people trying to prove things. And no, something is not looking good. So what we are doing is the final ultimate package mathematics. All these things have developed because so many people, did trial and error and came to the right conclusion. This is why, going to a PhD is not so easy. Even a student who's very good in doing coursework and very good in understanding all these mathematics, very good in answering exams, answering interviews, need not be so good in research because, there's something else required. That trial and error is required in original research. Anyway, let's not get into that. I don't want to talk about these things on YouTube. Okay, after the recording. So fix an n. So typo here, please point out later. Fix an n and let g be continuous so that the one norm of f minus g is less than 1 by n. So why is this true? Why such a g exists? Because CCX is dense in L1. So I can get a continuous function approximating as I want. So take g so that this is less than 1 by n. And note that tg is 0. That's something that we concluded, right? Because g is continuous. Agree?
Yes, sir.
Now let's call f minus g to be h for simplicity of notation, and let's look at th. If you look at trh, just, it follows immediately by triangle inequality. So trh is h here. So h here, so that is f minus g minus fx plus gx. So it is f minus g minus of fx minus gx. By triangle inequality, it is mod f minus g plus mod fx minus gx, right? So that is mod h plus mod hx. But mod hx comes out. Mod hx comes out because it's derivative with, integral with respect to y. So it will be measure and measure that cancels. So mod hx you get here, plus what is remaining is integral of mod h dm. Agree? This is just triangle inequality. Are you with me here? Only triangle inequality, nothing else. Okay, so you get this, and therefore you get th, which is the limit. No, so take lim sup. By taking lim sup, you get th is less than mod h plus what is the lim sup of this called? The sup of this is called sup of this is exactly the maximal function, right? Maximal function of a measure is measure of the ball by Lebesgue measure of the ball. And if h is the function, its total variation is mod h. So you have to take measure with respect to mod h dm divided by the Lebesgue measure. Measure with respect to mod h dm is exactly this integral of bxr divided by mbx. So this is exactly the maximal function when you take the sup. No? Agree? This is the quotient QR and you are taking supremum. So that is mh. And what is remaining here is mod h. Okay. Supremum of this as r varies is what is called mh. That's a definition.
Yes, sir.
Can I move on? Can I continue?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is just taking sup. Okay, I have lim sup here. Does it matter? Lim sup and sup? It will not matter. You know, with that definition, you can apply lim sup throughout. And what is the difference between lim sup and sup? Lim sup is taking infimum of the supremum after a stage, right? So if on the supremum if it is mh, then mh is a constant, so the infimum is mh itself. So you will get this easily from the definition. So you get th is less than or equal to mh plus mod h. Now trf is less than or equal to trg plus trh, right? By triangle inequality. Trf, f is h plus g. F is h plus g, so you can put h plus g, so it's again triangle inequality. This is true, and therefore it follows that Tf is less than or equal to, when you apply sup, what is Tg? Tg is 0, right? Because g is continuous. So you get Tf is less than or equal to Th, which is less than or equal to mh plus mod h. Th is less than mh plus mod h. So you get Tf is less than mh plus mod h. Now pick a y positive. Pick any y positive, and you know that the set where Tf is bigger than 2y is contained in this union. You agree? This is just set theory because Tf is less than mh plus mod h. So if mh is less than y and mod h is less than y, then Tf will be less than 2y. So that is same as saying this, no? If something is not there on the right hand side, then it's not there on the left hand side. If mh is less than y and mod h is less than y, then Tf will be less than y plus y, which is 2y. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Now you can see the proof, right? When I take measure, what will happen? Take Lebesgue measure. Lebesgue measure of this is less than Lebesgue measure of this plus Lebesgue measure of this. But Lebesgue measure of this, what theorem will you apply? Lebesgue measure of this, you know a bound, no? What was the theorem called? It is less than or equal to 3 power k times 1 norm of h divided by y.
Y.
That is called the, what was the name for that theorem?
Maximal, sir.
Maximal theorem. And Lebesgue measure of this, because h is an L1 function, Lebesgue measure of this also we computed, no? It is bounded by
Norm of h. One
Norm of h divided by y.
y.
Yeah. So you have these two bounds. So right hand side set as Lebesgue measure less than or equal to 3 power k by y, 1 norm of h plus 1 norm of h by y, which is less than or equal to 3 power k plus 1 divided by y and y, because h is chosen so that 1 norm of h is less than n, 1 by n, no? What is h? H is f minus g, and it was approximation. So this is less than 1 by n. That was your choice. Agree? So 1 norm of h is less than 1 by n. So this is less than 3 power k plus 1 by yn. All of you are with me?
Yes.
Agree? Now the beautiful observation is the left hand side has no n in it. So whatever n you choose, this is true. So you can pick n larger and larger. So what is the conclusion? The left hand side is contained in a set of measure right? This particular set has measure less than this one, but there is no n in it. So by choosing n bigger, again it is contained in this, so it is less than that, etc., etc. So this set is contained in the intersection of all these sets as n varies. N can be larger and larger and larger. So what is the conclusion? This set is contained in a set of measure. As n goes bigger and bigger, what is this? As n goes to infinity, it is 0. So this set is contained in a set of measure 0. But Lebesgue measure is complete. So if a set is contained in a set of measure 0, then what can you conclude? That its set itself is measurable and is of measure 0. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So conclusion, since LHS is independent of n, you get using the completeness of the Lebesgue measure, this is measurable and of measure 0. Okay, but this is true for whatever y, no? Pick any y positive and this is true. If TF is bigger than 2y, that measure is 0 and y can be arbitrarily small. So what is the conclusion? If you give me any y,
Measure of those.
0.001, y is 0.001, TF bigger than that is of measure 0. Now y is 0.000001, TF bigger than that measure is 0. So what is the conclusion?
The set at which TF is strictly positive has measure 0.
Yeah, so that means TF is 0 almost everywhere.
Okay.
Agree? If TF is not 0 almost everywhere, then there will be a positive measure set where TF is positive, but that cannot happen. And this is what we had to show. Proof is easy. It's just maximal theorem and then that observation and putting all that together. But proof is easy because you have the correct definition of Lebesgue point. Okay. Now, this is the last slide, but we are not done, no? We are not done because we have to do Radon-Nikodym derivative is same as the symmetric derivative. How do you show that? That follows from all these because look at the definition of Lebesgue point. Right? If this integral is 0, then integral without putting the modulus here is also 0, no? Just fy minus fx bracket, that is also 0, right? If this limit is 0, then that limit is also 0.
Less than
no?
equal to, yes.
Correct. That limit is 0. In that limit, suppose x is a Lebesgue point. So Lebesgue point is same as, Lebesgue point has the property that fx equal to limit 1 by m of that integral f dm. You agree? If x is a Lebesgue point, it has the property that fx equal to limit r goes to 0, 1 by m of that integral b of xr f dm. In particular, this property is true. Agree? If you put this as a bracket, then I can write it as two integrals, no? Integral
Yes,
f dm minus integral of fx dm. But integral of fx dm is same as fx because measure and measure cancels. And that fx I can take to the outside because limit r goes to 0, fx is fx. So x is a Lebesgue point in particular implies fx equal to limit of this average. It is in that sense that this statement makes sense. Average does not fluctuate much. Okay. So what is the conclusion? At Lebesgue, if f is an L1 function, at the Lebesgue point, fx is the average
Yes,
in the
sir.
limit. Average in
Yes,
the
sir.
limit. Okay. Now if yeah, but what is this average? Average is 1 by mbxr integral over bxr fdm, but that is just the symmetric derivative of the measure fdm, no? Limit r goes to 0, qr, where qr is mu of dxr by m of bxr. Mu of bxr is integral fdm over bxr if mu is fdm, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if mu is fdm, then this average is nothing but the symmetric derivative. Correct? So what you have observed is at a Lebesgue point, the symmetric derivative equals to fx. If x is a Lebesgue point, if f is in L1, and if x is a Lebesgue point, fx is nothing but d mu of x. You agree? Where mu is fdm. If mu is fdm, and if x is a Lebesgue point of f, then d mu at x is fx if x is a Lebesgue point. That follows from the definition of Lebesgue point.
Yes, sir.
Do you agree? Yeah. D mu is limit mu of ball by m of ball. But mu of ball is integral fdm over the ball. But that's exactly this one. Other side is fx. So on one
Yes,
side you
sir.
have d mu of x, other side you have fx. They actually agree if x is a Lebesgue point. Now what is theorem 7.8? D mu is f almost everywhere. Can you finish the proof?
Yes, sir. Because every f is
Almost every point is a Lebesgue point, and all the Lebesgue points they agree.
almost
So
like yes, sir. Yes.
it's a
So
wonderful
it's
proof.
almost
Yeah, wonderful proof because you introduce the correct notion of Lebesgue point, and they are almost everywhere you proved in some fashion using triangle inequality and Lusin's theorem and all that. And then you observe that the definition was in such a way that these two notions, Radon-Nikodym derivative and d mu, agrees on the Lebesgue point. And then you know that Lebesgue points are almost everywhere. And therefore they agree almost everywhere. It's a roundabout way of doing things. Okay, wonderful proof. And that's the last slide. So we finish it today. So I finished without taking extra time. So that's good. Okay, so let me stop sharing. And so it's a slightly different kind of mathematics, no, from whatever we have been doing. There's a little bit more inequalities and analysis and all that.
inequality is more. Okay. Yes, sir.
I can also stop recording.